Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Avinash and in this video I'm going to discuss one service named AWS Config. So I've seen like around 3 to 4 questions on this AWS Config topic in my recent AWS DevOps professional certification exam. Okay, and I also seen some questions in solution architect exam as well. So I'm going to explain you what exactly this config service is and how we can configure this config and how we can work with this configure service. Okay, so firstly, this AWS config, whenever you're searching this config here, you can observe this description: track resource inventory and changes. So basically, whatever the resource we have in our AWS environment, we can track the resource and we can get a timeline of the resource. So that is actually a secondary, feature of this AWS config. So what is the primary feature of this AWS config? See, whatever the resource it is tracking, it providing the timeline. Along with that, we can set up some compliance standards. See, for example, so this is, assume this as a real environment, so which is hosting a secured application, and I have a lot of resources like EC2 instances, snapshots, AMIs, right, some S3 buckets, some RDS snapshots. Okay, so I have some compliance standards so that no S3 bucket should made public, or for data backup purpose no S3 bucket should create without versioning. If anyone creating without versioning, I want to treat that resource as a non-compliant resource and I want to automatically fix the issue. I want to automatically stop block enable block public access option, right? So I want to stop sharing any snapshot publicly. So we can set up some compliance standards, and for some services remediation also available. See this remediation, right? If anyone create an S3 bucket, if anyone made that S3 bucket public, okay, so if I set a compliance standard to, right, to not make any bucket public, so then this remediation automatically runs and it is going to modify S3 bucket setting also. So without any manual intervention, we can modify the settings as well. So again, let's go to this AWS config and let's understand how we can enable this first. See, in my account, Mumbai region, I already enabled this. If you really want to know how to enable this AWS config for the first time, you can go to any other region or then click on get started. You can even go with one-click setup also. Whenever you click on one-click setup, right, it is going to pick all the resources. It is going to monitor the resource changes. Basically, it is going to record the changes happening on our resources. It look for the changes continuously. It is going to create an S3 bucket and it is going to write the logs into that S3 bucket. And these are the default settings it is going to pick. So it just one click. You just go and click on confirm. That's it. It is going to enable. You can use that option. Otherwise, you can click on get started. So you can choose, I want to monitor all the resources, not just specific resources. And I want to go with continuous recording, daily recording, daily once, like a cron job. Okay, so then I'm going to use an existing config rule and you can choose to create an S3 bucket. It creates in the selected region. Then click on next. These rules, right? So I will talk about these rules in some time. Then click on next. All we need to do is just click on confirm. That's it. So once you click on confirm, automatically you will get this dashboard. So now if you observe this dashboard, so we have not added any rules. So we can go and we can create a rule here, and whatever the rule we are creating, that rule will go to the resources. It will check whether the resource is following the standard or compliance we have set up here. If it is matching, so then it will list under this compliant resource. If the resource is not following, so then it will list under this non-compliant resource. To explain this AWS config service, I'm going to use S3 buckets. So I already created some S3 buckets. Actually, I created three S3 buckets. Okay, one is Avis 1, 2, 3. Like these are the three buckets. And this bucket, right, config bucket. Whenever you enable this AWS config, okay, automatically we will get a bucket. This is what the bucket I got when I created this, when I enable this config here. So you can ignore that bucket. So total I have three buckets. So now what my compliance standard is, see, whatever the bucket I'm creating in this AWS account, so that should be enabled with versioning. So currently I have three buckets. Is this buckets enabled with versioning? So I went to do first bucket, it's a disable. Went to do second bucket also, it's also in disable state, and third bucket also, it's actually in disable state. So my requirement is I want to, like, I want to set up a rule that can go to S3 buckets, that can look for versioning option. If versioning is enabled, it will treat that resource as a compliant resource. If any bucket is not enabled with the versioning, it is going to treat that as a non-compliant resource. So that I am going to do as a first step. So as a second step, I will add remediation. So whatever the resource I am going to create, okay, even if I set it to disable mode, that remediation should take effect and it should enable bucket versioning automatically. So I will explain you that as a step 2 of this config rule creation. So let's go to this rules and click on add rule. So we have an option to choose AWS managed rules. AWS is giving 385 rules. Like, these are predefined rules. See, if you want to create your own rule, you can use this create custom lambda rule also. So, but this I will explain in a separate video. So for now, let's go to add AWS managed rules. So we are in very initial stage of understanding this config, right? So you may confuse a bit if you are using this lambda rule. First, let's understand this AWS managed rule first. So now, if you observe here, we have lot of so very secured options, important options here. See, I will show you couple of. Let's search for encryption. So you can filter with more resources in a single screen. Encryption, for example, this EBS, EC2 EBS encryption by default, and volumes. See, the RDS storage is encrypted or not, RDS cluster is encrypted or not, Redshift cluster is encrypted or not. If any cluster is not encrypted, it will treat that as a non-compliant resource. Okay, so encrypted volumes, you see this, if you select this, whatever the EBS volume you are creating in your AWS account, if it is not encrypted, it is going to give list of the resources here. So that is one option, encrypted volume, that widely used one. And you can even find something like public. For example, if you are taking RDS, okay, if you are taking RDS, so RDS snapshot public prohibited. See, if any RDS snapshots are public, then it is going to treat that resource as a non-compliant resource and it is going to give list of the resources. Okay, for some resources we can for some resources we can apply remediation, automatic transition, automatic fixing the issue in simple. So some options, some rules don't have that remediation also. So it depends on that. And also we have two types of modes. You see this evaluation mode. Some are detective. So that means after resource creation only, this config can identify. But if you observe some, you can observe proactive also. So whenever you are creating the resources, before resource creation itself, if you are enabling that option itself, it will detect that. So but unnecessarily if you enable this proactive, right, so it will lead to some unnecessary cost. I found that from AWS documentation. Avoid unnecessary AWS config evaluation with this periodic or hybrid rules. So better to go with this the role that detective one. So whenever you do any changes on this resource, so then only this config will go and evaluate the resource. If you are not doing any change on the resource, so it may not evaluate it. Okay, so the one I'm going to explain here is versioning. S3 bucket versioning enable checks whether versioning is enabled for your S3 bucket. If versioning is not enabled on any of the specific bucket, it will treat that as a non-compliant resource. So then click on next. So this is a name and evaluation mode. So you want to filter all changes or recorded by config or just resource changes related to S3. So we are good to go with resources with S3. Parameter, it's purely optional. So then click on next. This is a review screen. Scroll down, click on save. Alright, so now a config rule got created. So this is like, the detective evaluation, right, not happened yet. You have to wait for just a minute. So if you wait for a minute, it is going to list out the resources here once this evaluation completed. Okay. So I'm just going to refresh the page and you can observe here. So just now the evaluation completed. If you scroll down, it is going to list out the resources. See, I have total 4 buckets in my account. All 4 resources are non-compliant resource. So that means none of these S3 buckets are enabled with the versioning. Okay, can I modify these resources manually and can I observe the change reflection here? Of course, you can do that. So you go to S3 platform, you select any of the bucket. For example, I'm picking this Avisway 1 bucket. So currently, this versioning is in disable mode. So I'm doing it manually. First, click on edit. I'm going to enable this versioning, then save changes. So earlier, if you go to these roles, how many non-compliant resources we have, even you can go to this dashboard, you can observe. Earlier, total 4 non-compliant resources are there. So that related to this role. So go to that role, select the role, scroll down. So these are the rules, these are the resources. This is a role and these are the resources that is non-compliant. Okay, I did some change, right? So this config is going to detect the change. It is going to re-evaluate the resource. Once the re-evaluation completed, so AWS detect this resource as this specific bucket as a compliant resource. So let's wait for just a minute and give a refresh. So you have to be little patient. Why? Because these changes, right, will take 2 to 5 minutes sometimes. So it's not just a spontaneous one. If you really want to reevaluate, we have a button. You can go here, you can reevaluate. So these are going to detect a bit quickly only. You observe here. So that Avisway 1 bucket is not in the list now. If you click here, if you select compliant, see this Avisway 1 bucket is in the compliant resource list. How it came to compliant resource list? Okay, as I have taken a manual action on these resources, so config identified. So how it is identified? So we have selected this detective mode, right? So it looks for the changes happening on that specific resource. So as the change happened, it performed the evaluation, it identified the resource as a compliant resource. Okay, so this is one option. See, this is manual. So if I want to remediate manually, I no need to go to this resource, I no need to go to property, and I no need to enable this. What we can do simply, you can go to this non-compliant resource, select the resource, click on remediate. When you click on this remediate, okay, so now what happened? A remediation run is going to initialize. We cannot perform multiple at a time. So I have initialized it, right? So in some time, right, you can observe here a remediation action is going to taken, and this also become a compliant resource. So bucket is Avis 2, right? Let's go to S3 bucket and observe here. Initially versioning is disabled, so but as we have selected this remediate option, it is going to change. So okay, so instead of this manual remediation, but of course we have not set up any remediation on this rule. I forgot to mention that. Okay, so we have to set up first remediation, then we have to select, and then we have to click on remediation. Okay, so what exactly is remediation? So go to where we can configure this. So go to actions, manage remediation for the rule we have configured. Go to actions, manage remediation. So you want to manually remediate, the option I have shown you. Okay, if you select this manual remediate, whatever the resource listed here, I have to select the resource, I have to click on remediate. Without configuring remediation itself, sometime back I tried it, so that is not work, that won't work. Okay, after creation only I have to use this option. Without remediation configuration, this is not a valid option. It's not happening anything, nothing happening. Okay, so go to actions, manage remediation, that is manual, sometime back I performed. But instead of this manual remediation, automatic remediation. So what we can do, this remediation action gets triggered automatically when the resource in scope become non-compliant. Okay, I'm going to select automatic remediation. See, whenever you tried first time, if it is failed, you want to retry again, you can configure that values as well here. Okay, fine. If resource is not compliant, what remediation action you are going to take? Click here, search for versioning. I have selected configure S3 bucket versioning here. Okay, so now what are the input parameters you have to give? Okay, first bucket name we have to provide. So you can provide manually a single bucket name, or you can pick resource ID as a bucket name. And versioning state, it's optional, you can keep it as a enable. And automation assume role we have to provide here if we select bucket name as a resource ID parameter. Okay, so I have selected configure S3 bucket versioning. Scroll down, under resource ID I'm going to select as a S3 bucket. So S3 bucket is a parameter I'm taking. So in simple, under this configure, under rules, okay, under resource section we have resource ID here, right? I'm picking that as a bucket name. Okay, so then versioning state, obviously I want to keep it in enable state, that's a default option, but still if you want to give, you can copy this enable, you can give that here. So now automation assume role we have to provide here. See, who is going to perform this activity, enabling versioning activity, who is going to perform for us? See, there is a service called SSM, Systems Manager. So you go to Systems Manager. In Systems Manager, we have this automation option. If you go to this automation option, so here the Systems Manager is going to run automation, and it is going to enable versioning on the buckets that are non-compliant. So now a question, how this Systems Manager will get access on our S3 buckets. So for that, we have to create an IAM role. Go to IAM screen, create an IAM role. First, use that IAM role for assume. Click on create role. We are going to use this role with systems manager. So select systems manager, click on next, and here I'm giving S3 full access. So why? Because I want to edit the bucket, right? So obviously S3 full access is required. Then click on next. Okay, so then you can give a role name yt-config role is the name I have given. Then create role. Alright, an IAM role got created. You have to copy this role ARN and you have to provide here. Before saving these changes, how many automation jobs I have here? Currently I have 2. So before making this video, I just verified whether the things I'm going to explain in this video is coming properly or not. To verify that, I tested. So these I performed long time back. So now once I configured this, we may get some more executions here. Okay, so then click on save changes. All right, so now I have configured remediation on this config rule. Now I can go and I can perform this manual remediation. So earlier when we click on this remediation, nothing happened. Why? Because I have not set up any remediation action, right? So but this time let's observe, this is my bucket. I'm going to test it manually. Avisway 2 is my bucket. Bucket versioning is in disable state. Let's go to this rule, select the bucket you want to apply remediation, then click on remediate. Okay, so now a remediation should trigger. You see this, earlier this not happened, but now action executed successfully. So what happened under SSM executions? You see this, a third one came. Observe this time, this is recent one. Okay, so when you click on this execution, under outputs, or sorry, under input parameters, you can observe, see we did manual execution, right? So for Avisway 2 bucket, so that execution happened and end output is success. Okay, so here if you observe action executed successfully, it's still showing as a non-compliant. It will take some time to detect it and it will automatically move to compliant resource after some time. So to verify this, let's go to S3 bucket, give a refresh. Earlier this versioning is disabled, now you see it is enable. Okay, so this is how exactly we can do manual remediations. Okay, see now what happen if I create a new S3 bucket by keeping this versioning in disabled state? That is what, let's test for automatic remediation. Click on create bucket. I'm giving bucket name as Avis 4. I'm going with all default options, and important thing you have to observe here is bucket versioning. Let's keep it in disable state. Scroll down, create bucket. See, I have created a new bucket and I kept this bucket versioning in disable state. Okay, now let's go back to config rule and observe that here. Okay, so now just give a refresh. Alright, and that Avis 2 bucket, sometime back we manually did this, right? So that become as a compliant with this action execution. Okay, so that means the manual execution is success. Okay, now I have created a new S3 bucket and I kept that bucket versioning in disable state. Let's see what happens here. Okay, you have to wait for a minute or two. So this is going to detect it automatically. So then it will list the resource here. If you don't want to wait for that 3 to 4 minutes, so what you can do, you can go here, actions, and re-evaluate. Okay, you can even use that option. Okay, so now if you observe this Avisway 4 bucket is now detected as a non-compliant. But again, I'm not going to run any remediation manually this time. So I will just wait for a minute or two to automatically execute this. So currently only 3 executions, right? So I'm going to wait for a minute or two to trigger that execution. Okay, I have given refresh and you see this Avis Way 4 action executed successfully. If you go to automation screen, earlier only 3, right? Just give a refresh. We got the fourth one also. And if you go to this S3 bucket, if you give a refresh. So now observe here bucket versioning is enabled. See, I have not performed this thing manually. So it automatically based on the resource I'm creating. So now if I'm going to create another bucket also, that bucket within some time they will get that as a resource here. If it is non-compliant, automatically this remediation action is going to take effect on the resource, and it is going to apply the change automatically so that resource will become compliant in, like, in some time. For existing resources, as a one time operation, you can select it, you can remediate if you really want, or whenever you are doing any changes on the resource, it will detect and it is going to uh, apply that action execution. So then it will make that resource as a compliant resource. So this is the primary feature of this AWS Config Service. So this is one example I have explained here. In similar way, we have lot of rules here. For example, instance check or instance type. If you observe desired instant type, so if you are selecting this desired instant type role, so now what happen, it will ask you, okay, whatever the instant type you mention here, if any user is launching same instance, then fine. If anyone is launching any other instance type, for example, if I am giving like a T2 micro, so if anyone is launching T2 micro, that is compliant. Apart from T2 micro, if anyone is launching any other resource, it will become as a non-compliant. Some commonly used rules are sharing the resources uh, to another account, making resources public is one common thing, and also sharing snapshots or EBS volumes with another AWS accounts or public is another one. Whenever any ACM certificate is expiring, so if any access key age is more than the defined days, so we want to basically rotate that access keys, right? We can get list of the resources, whether any account is part of organization. So we have a lot of rules here, so you can evaluate that rules. Along with that, we have one more useful option, so that is resource. So with the help of this resource option, we can find the resource we have in AWS environment, and also we can find all changes happening on the resource. So for that, what we can do, navigate to resources. So you can select resource type. For example, I want to observe what are all the changes happening on a specific IAM user, right? When permission is added, when permission is removed, I want to identify all those things. So for that, what I can do here, I can filter here. I'm filtering with IAM user. I have selected IAM user, then click on apply. See, if you have any compliant standard for the selected resource, you can filter compliant resource or non-compliant resource as well. You can even include deleted resource as well if you have any. So you see this is a deleted resource, this is also deleted resource. So if you want to identify when it got deleted and all the things, you can just open this resource and you can click on this resource timeline. So when you click on resource timeline, it gave you entire timeline when the user created, So when it is modified, when it is deleted, everything it is going to show. So this deleted resource is not is going to fetch most of the information. So to explain you this resource option, what I did, I have taken this 0407 test user. I have added a permission some days back, like yesterday I believe. So just click on this resource and click on this resource timeline. When you click on this resource timeline, it is fetching the details. Okay, so observe here on July 15th I did one configuration change. What exactly that configuration change is? I have attached a policy. That policy is Amazon S3 full access. On 16th I did one more change. I attached one more policy, so that is Alexa for business. Okay, so you can observe from what, like, what actually happening here, what configuration got changed for this resource. Okay, let me pick another resource, I mean another user, then click on apply. So if you observe this Avinash underscore to user, I did some modifications for this user. I have added policy, I have removed a couple of policies for testing purpose. So click on resource timeline and you can observe the configuration changes. If you observe on July 15th, I did some configuration changes. See, I have removed, these are the earlier ones from to current one. Earlier, I have a policy S3 with IP condition. I remove this. S3 with IP condition, I have removed that policy. And if you observe later what I did, I have added a lambda policy. So you can observe the resource modifications as well. You can keep a track all changes happening on the resource. You might get a doubt, okay, so from where this config is getting all this information? So config will connect with CloudTrail. It is going to get all the changes happening on the resource and it is going to provide the timeline for the resources. Alright, so that is another advantage we will get by using this AWS Config Service. I hope you found this information useful, and if anyone is actively learning AWS, don't forget to share these resources with them. This might definitely help them. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and see you again in next video.